Good morning. I'm going to set my clock here. Not that because the Cowboys are on or the Vikings are playing. But because I also know that sometimes some sermons have a bad habit of having rabbits. This one will have maybe that possibility. I'll do the best I can to shoot them before they get out of the hole. As you can tell, I'm still trying out my raspy voice. Last year about this time, I tried a limp out for a little while and couldn't decide whether or not I wanted to keep it, so I kept it around for a little longer. This year I went to the doctor and he said, well, what would you like to try this year? I said, how about a raspy voice? And so next year I'm probably going to try baldness. We'll see. I mean, I might want like a patch over the eye. I don't know. Just we'll see how that goes. Colossians chapter 1. That was weird. Starting in verse 13. Colossians chapter 1, starting in verse 13. As you're turning there, I will start my clock. If I shoot enough rabbits, maybe we'll beat the Methodists to the white meat today. I'm going to get some better jokes. Oh, you laugh on that one. Seriously? All right. Verse 13. He has delivered us from the dominion of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sin. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things. And in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on the earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Last week we looked at how Paul was talking about how he walk worthy of Christ, and one of the central point of what Paul was saying is really the only way to have this walk is to have a deep and thorough knowledge, both in a very large scholarly academic realm and a very practical basis that is both where theology meets the street. And typically when you hear a sermon like that, then the next Sunday people go, and then what we want to talk about is God has a wonderful plan for your life. What Paul does is go straight from that verse into Christology. The doctrine of the study of who Christ is. Now the reason why this is important, and I'll get to it in just a minute, because I want to discuss something. Okay. I want to discuss the difference between a connotation and a denotation. Words have both connotation and they have both denotation. You say, we know this. Okay, I'm glad you know this. But some of you don't. So I'm just going to explain it for everybody that does or doesn't know. A denotation is the lexical or dictionary definition of a word. That's its denotation, what it denotes. Its connotation, how we use it. You say, well, aren't those the same? No. How many of you have ever heard of the word ratchet? The minute I hear the word ratchet, I thought of the thing my socket goes on to and goes, yeah? No, apparently in today's culture, ratchet means ugly. I never thought of it meaning that. Bad. ill, sick. There's a denotation. If I'm bad, the denotation means I've done something wrong. The connotation, that's cool. When we come to the Bible, it's not simply enough to know the connotation and the denotation of a word in English, because the Bible isn't written in English. It's written in Greek in the New Testament, Hebrew in the Old Testament for the most part. So you must understand that word's connotation and denotation before you can ever go and look at it in English. Otherwise, you're lost. And you'll come up with some very aberrant theology. We will see this because what this passage has is, to the audience in Colossae, Paul is addressing this to a bunch of Gnostics who are attacking the church. In the 3rd century, a man comes along by the name of Arius, who takes this and creates an abominable heresy about the Christology of the Son. We will try to address both. That's why I set my watch, so I know where I am and where to speed up and stop shooting rabbits. It begins, though, with Paul telling us about what Jesus does. And we're going to go back to verse 12, because verse 12 is important. Giving thanks to the Father who qualified you, made you fit, made you right, made you capable of being what the Son is doing to you. Without that, you're incapable. Who qualified you to share in the inheritance. You share in the inheritance of saints because the Son qualified you to do so. Period. That's how you qualify. The death of Christ qualifies you to inherit being a part of the inheritance of saints. Why? He has delivered us from the dominion of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son. Here we are, under the authority of darkness. That's really what it says. The dominion, the power, the authority of darkness. Here's where we are, and the Son takes us and walks us and places us in the kingdom of the Son by the will of the Father. We just saw where Pastor Shahid had been released by the Iranians. And a lot of people, when they see this delivered, that's kind of the idea. Well, we paid some money and they released them. Now, the concept here, as if a Delta team had gone to the prison, killed the guards, grabbed Shahid, and then grabbed him and put him in the United States. That's the idea. And that happens by the work of the Son. Why? Why is this important? Gnostics believed that the material man was evil. Only the spirit was worth delivering. And that Christ upon the cross was two separate entities. You had Jesus the man, and you had Christ the Spirit. And the Spirit Christ, when Jesus is dying, said, I'm out of here, dude, it's all you. And pops smoke and leaves Jesus holding the bag. That's why he yells out, my God, why have you forsaken me? See, they're reading the Bible. They're just reading the Bible poorly. And so what you have is Paul making a refutation that not only does the Son possess the totality of the Father as the Godhead, as God, he's not the Father, but as God, he has the ability to deliver. See, because under the Gnostic system, that's not possible. Body bad, spirit good. And now Paul is going to tell us how. He is the image of the invisible God. There's going to be words that are going to trip people up and trip people up to this day. Image, firstborn, beloved, before all things, firstborn of the dead and preeminent one. You also throw in there, if you want to, begotten. This is where Arius will camp out in the 3rd century, because Arius is looking at the connotation, not the denotation. That was good. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Now, to the Gnostics, this is blown, because why? They believe that no one knows who the original God is. A long time ago, there was a deity that created it either himself or just existed. And he got kind of lonely, so he started generating more deity. And all these deities and demiurges, and just they come into existence. And then the world is created by one of these demiurges, and then he kind of goes off and plays golf and drinks coffee and just kind of leaves it there. And another one comes along, and he messes it all up. And it's ruined by this other god because he's bad. And then this Christ one comes along, and he kind of helps clean it up. That's what they believe. And you look at it and you go, man, these guys are whacked out. They're sitting around the room going, here. You were thinking it. That's why you're giggling. And Paul goes, no. Christ, when you saw Christ, when the apostles saw Christ, he was and is the image of God. Now what happens is we get hung up on the word image because we got photographs. I have an image of me when I first got here when I was a little bit skinnier. My wife's a great cook. And I had less facial hair. And so we understand images change. That's a connotation of the word. The denotation in the Greek concept is that the image is an exact duplicate of the thing it images. So if the Father is omniscient, the image is omniscient. The Son is omniscient. If the Father is eternal, the Son is eternal. It is an exactness. And so Paul is saying to the Gnostics, hey, I don't know what you're smoking, but Jesus Christ who died for the Colossae church, you Colossians, you Colossians, I messed that one up, didn't I? Jesus Christ is deity because he is entirely the image of the Father. He's not the Father, he is... I love it when I try to make a great point and I cough. He's the exact image of deity. This is important because of the next word. Firstborn of all creation. The Gnostics, again, believed that some other God created the world. Paul is saying Jesus is the firstborn of created. Connotation. Jesus is made. He's the firstborn. This is where Arius grabs a hold of and goes, the second person of the triune God is a created thing. Going off of the connotation. See, they're reading the Bible, but they're reading it poorly. Dangerous things about the Bible is when we sit alone and read the Bible and have no other input but ourselves. Arius is reading Colossians. Arius is reading it wrong. And the influence of Arius' heresy extends to our culture today because he sat alone with Scripture and read. Now, it's not that Scripture is not sufficient in itself, but Athanasius, who argued with him, studied and discussed to ensure that what he was reading fell in line and how he was reading Scripture fell in line. So what you have here is Arius looks at this, capitalizes on the connotation, goes, firstborn means created. Why? Because firstborn sons usually are created. The problem is, in Greek culture, firstborn does not always mean first child born. It is a statement about position. The firstborn child had total authority as the representation of the father. My brother, Brian, in the Greek culture, to this day, could give me orders I would have to follow. That doesn't happen today. I look at mom and go, Mom, Brian's kerneling again. Make him stop. It's always great as a kid. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. It's not that. It's not like that. But he could give me orders, and I'd have to follow him. Why? He holds the position of authority as the firstborn son. Christ is the image of the Father in totality of who God is, and possesses the representation authority as the Father. That's what it means. So much more different than Jesus is a created being and less than the Father now, isn't it? Certainly less than what the Gnostic said is the God Christ ran off and left you. No, we have the Son, who is the exact image of the Father, who represents the authority of the Father. Why? Why is this important? Why? Overall creation. Genesis talks about the creative event. Nothing comes into existence without the Son being there. Nothing comes into existence without the Son making it. For by him all things were created, in heaven and earth, visible, invisible, whether thrones, dominions, rulers, or authorities. There is nothing that exists that does not exist by the will of the Son, to include you. Well, no, my mom and dad, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, great. We live in a culture today where birth rates are extremely high. So high, in fact, that we have grown a callousness to the fact that we are also responsible for one of the greatest holocausts that the world has ever seen. You go to some place in Africa where the miracle of birth is really a miracle of birth. It's not that it's not here, but we just become so casual. There's a kid being born every minute here. We take it for granted. A baby doesn't get made without God making it. Amen. You don't exist. You don't take your next breath without God willing it. That's the point. All that exists, all that is not something started by some God that no one knows that has run off and left and abandoned this whole world. No, the Son is intimately and imminently involved, not only in the creation of the world, but its continuance. It is made by him, for him, through him, whether you see it or not. Angels, demons, princes, principalities, rulers, kingdoms. It all exists, and they all tumble at the will of the Son. It's very basic. It's very basic theology coming out of there. Much more different than what the Gnostics are teaching, in that there's this secret knowledge, and once you understand these gods and realize that your God has no personal relationship with you, then you can live your life however you want. And hopefully the scores are tallied up at the end of the day, and he loves you enough to bring you to heaven. And there are religions like that today. Maybe, hopefully, you'll be one of the chosen number of the 144,000, because there's some denominations, man. If the ship is full, Maybe eventually you might be able to get on that ship. And so you have this issue of connotation and denotation. And a lot of times people focus in on the fact that Christ is a created being because of the word firstborn or begotten. And yet if you understand the connotation, you'll come up with one understanding of theology, and its denotation give you another. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. My body is held together by skin, muscle, bones, and sinew. Yes. But it holds together at the will of the Son. The pew that you are enjoying sitting on holds itself together because of the will of the Son. This isn't some ethereal, overall, everything holds together because God wills it and then he kind of wanders away. No! You do not serve a God who is unaware of the fact that you are sitting currently, and I am standing currently, and you are listening, hopefully, and I have a raspy voice currently. He is aware exactly the pew you're sitting on, not because you sit there every week, because he's intimately involved in your life. And everything that exists within this world, and if we begin to live our lives with the understanding that everything that exists because of his willing it to exist and continues to will it to exist. That's what he says. In him all things hold together and continue to hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. So he's not just some God that's merely the image of deity. He's not some God that holds a position of primacy. He's not some God that simply creates and runs off. He's not some God that creates and is intimately involved in creation and continues to sustain the creation. He's the head of the church. He is aware, Colossians, that you have a heresy that is attacking the person who is the head of your church. A lot of times we forget who's in charge at church. Let me give you a clue. It ain't you, and it ain't me. And if you ever thought it was you, you better read that passage again. And if I ever think it is me, I need to read that passage. He, Christ, is the head of the church, and our behavior needs to reflect it. Period. Why? Because he makes the church, he makes all things, he sustains all things, because he has the primacy of positions to give commands to all things, because he is deity. Period. He is the beginning. I just lost my place. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. Firstborn from the dead. Yes, firstborn from the dead. Just as he is firstborn with primacy over all things, when he rises from the dead, he is primacy over salvation. He holds the same authority and position as the firstborn child in the passage earlier, now over those who rise from the dead. So how is it that he can transfer us out of a dominion that is ruled by the prince of the power of the air? Because he made that dude. And he has the authority over that dude. And he has the authority over the devil because not only does he hold the position of primacy in creation, he holds the position of primacy in the resurrection. And so he comes and he takes us from this dominion and he brings us into this kingdom and establishes us. Why and how? Because of who he is. He is deity. He is the Son of God. He is the firstborn. That's the power of the Son of God. That is why when he goes to the cross, it is such a wonderful concept. Imagine being the most powerful man in the room and allowing people to kill you so that you could be free. I don't know if anybody else would do that other than Christ. Let's continue on. In everything, he might be preeminent. In everything, he might be preeminent. First, greatest, best. He is not a slacker deity that the Gnostics have. He is not some weird deity that screwed things up, and by knowing him, we will never know the one true God. No, by knowing him and his place and his pride of office and his sacrifice, we have a direct line to the Father because he is the Father's representative in physical form to man. He is the head of the church to which we can have a relationship by which we can claim Abba, Father. He is preeminent in all things. It means he doesn't take a second place to any of us. Ever. Ever. He is not second. He is prime. When was the last time he was prime in your life? When was the last time he was prime in my life? Questions I ask myself. Questions we should be asking ourselves. When was the last time he was prime? First. Treated as the head of the church. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Paul will later on go on in chapter 2 to go all the fullness of deity, clarify this even more. The Gnostics believe that since you have a physical form, it's bad. And Paul is saying, in physical form, all the fullness of God dwelled there. Arius takes this and goes, see, he was created and then God put the fullness into him. That's what Joel Osteen's wife believes too. I got a video clip on my wall. I watched that and then yelled at the computer screen for about an hour. Because that's just straight Arianism. Jesus is a created thing and then God took and put deity in him. Another way this works out, and when we looked in Philippians chapter 3, there's a thing called the kenotic theory, in which when Christ comes down in human form, that he leaves behind his deity in heaven and isn't fully divine on earth. Comes about in the 1800s, 1830, by a Lutheran theologian named Thomas, it's German. German from the 1800s pretty much means liberal. There. It's a broad broach statement, but I can pretty well defend that. There's a few that are conservative come out of there, but most of your German theologians in the 1800s, really bad. Really, really bad. Really bad. He comes up with this theory to answer a question that no one asked. And guess what? He sat alone and he read the Bible. And when other people challenged his view, he went, you guys are all idiots because I'm reading the Bible. He didn't read Colossians. Or he did, he had to ignore it. In the physical form of Jesus Christ, all the fullness of God dwelt. This is how he's able to take you from a dominion held by a malevolent creature and transfer you into his kingdom. That's how he does it. He is in totality all of deity. Period. Now, why is that important? I'm glad you asked those questions. And through him, to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. It is essential that he is deity while he is on earth so that he can reconcile perfectly, satisfy the wrath of God perfectly, so that he can reconcile, that'd be us, to the Father. If he is less than divine, his salvation is ineffective. He fits the category of the Gnostic or the Arian deity, which isn't really a God. To reconcile all things, whether on heaven or on earth. How? By making peace with the blood of his cross. Remember back when the angels came to the shepherds out in the field, and a lot of times we hear the herald of the angel says, on earth, peace and goodwill towards men. We've all heard that statement. It's not really how that statement's translated. On earth, peace to men with whom God is pleased. Same concept. The blood of Christ brings peace in a war that we are having with the Father. Next week we will see it. The reconciliation Christ brings a cessation of hostilities between man towards God. Next week we'll cover that passage. Peace comes in the relationship between us and the Father, not because another deity just says, it's done away with, but because the Son sheds his blood as a final, perfect sacrifice, according to the book of Hebrews, to cover every sin that exists and will exist and could ever exist. The blood of Christ is sufficient to cover the sins of every man, woman, and child. The reconciliation that he brings in application are for those who know the Lord. The capability and the application are two separate things. You say, well, what's the problem with Arius? To this day, Arianism exists in various forms. Its impact from the 3rd century. In the 4th century, the Goths come and sack Rome and begin to kill all Trinitarian priests. Rome, for a while, was controlled by a bunch of Arians who do not believe that Jesus is the second person of the triune God. And if you have a God that isn't God, do you have a salvation that is secure? But they're reading the Bible. And they got that from this passage. Christ does not take on a semblance of the Father. He is the exact representation of the Godhead. He possesses the authority of the representation of the Godhead. And when he speaks with the authority of deity. Because he creates all that exists. And all that exists is created for him. Not because he is a lonely individual who needs more BFFs on Facebook. By the way, I really hate that post of, do you love Jesus? Like. If you really love Jesus, share. I will ban you if you send me that nonsense. Period. It's garbage. Christ is not alone going, oh man, I need some BFFs. I know what I'll do. It's okay with you. We should make this little planet over here. Put some people on it. And then for entertainment, watch them screw it all up. How about that? It'd be giggles better than football. Like a Viking kicker missing the field goal. I think the Westminster Confession of Faith actually makes the point right. The chief end of man is to know God and enjoy him forever. He creates so that man has the ability to know God and enjoy him forever. So that he shows his grace and his holiness and his magnitude in the aspect of creation and in his sustainment. And not just in his sustainment, but then in his willingness to die for the very thing that is cursing at him, spitting at him, and yelling, crucify him. For the wretches that are us. So that he may have the authority as the firstborn from the dead. So we have the hope of the resurrection. So that he can reconcile us back to the Father. Because the goal is to transfer us from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. Paul doesn't move to basic theology. Paul, right after he talked about heavy study and practicality, says that this is both heavy study and practicality. How all this comes together is a mystery. There are some things about the sovereign will of God and the ability of man that remain mysterious to us all, and we can come up with theories on how that all works out. And one day, we will all know and realize we were all wrong. And that's okay. You're here today and you say, I don't know about this life that's in the body of the believer. I would like to know more about the God who is both in physical form and deity, who died to deliver me from one kingdom of oppression to a kingdom of freedom. My microphone, as the praise band comes to sing, and you all begin to stand, will be turned off. I will have a conversation with you about the one true God who is the exact image of the Father, the preeminent one in salvation and in all things, about the great love and mercy he has for the creation that is us, and desires to have a relationship with you. If you're here today and you say, I've been coming to Skyline, we've been enjoying it, we've been looking for a church home, I also invite you to come down the aisle and be a part of this wonderful body of believers who understand who the head of the church is. As the praise band sings, if you will please stand.